Gary. Well, first off, this is coming from the intelligence community, which isn't a community and has no intelligence whatsoever, right? Intel, by that word, they mean information coming into you that's been vetted and concluded and so on. They don't do that. They have no understanding of accurate thinking, conclusions, or any of this kind of stuff. They never analyze their own thinking. They're just reactive beings within the Katharen mafia structure. And now they're pimping bioweapons that will be made around DNA to kill you specifically, or if not you specifically, the larger family or tribe that you live within, right? And they tried this with the COVID, because COVID, theoretically, according to what we see from the scans of its own supposed genetic structure, would not be particularly effective against Jewish people. Okay, so it's actually a racially excluding virus, according to the sequence that's been presented. It has to do with the ACE2 receptors and how the Jewish lineage has a different reaction with the ACE2 receptors than all the other people on the planet. And so the Jews would theoretically not be as susceptible to this. Well, a couple of problems with this, there's a lot of problems with this. Okay, so I dispute that they can make a DNA-specific bioweapon. I dispute that the genetic sequences that were presented in any way resemble the COVID that's out and about. Okay, I dispute that the COVID exists as they say it exists. Now, we know that they made this, or they got the spike protein from prions. These prions showed up in the mad cow episodes. These were prions that were supposedly arrived on Earth from space as a microvitide that settled in a particular area of Scotland. You know, on those prions is the little spike protein. The spike protein, after a great many years, from 1980s, I think it was 84 through the 90s, it took them that long to separate the spike protein from the prion itself, right? This is the supposed lineage for the spike protein that you can hunt up if you get deep into the Narodime. So if you look into the Narodime, they leave trails all the time as to how they confuse language, how they're querying your language, querying your history, and all of that. And you can go back and unqueer it, right? You can go back and find out where they departed from this stuff. So there was a big effort in the 1920s when they were querying with Tesla to replace him with Einstein, to get Vernadsky out of the way and pump Darwin up once again. All of these kind of things, right? So you can see this in our history. At this moment here in today's history, we see the CIA pimping the idea of DNA as being able to be made into bioweapons, a la the COVID thing. Now we know that they're attempting to do this, but they've been attempting to do it for 70 years. And from the 80s into the 90s, it took them that long to deal with the spike protein and separate it from the prion. Then it took Fauci's chief of staff approximately, as far as I know, from about year 2000 until 2016 before they were able to take that spike protein and think that they had attached it to a virus. You know, you can't see viruses. You can't. It's not like you got a little mechanical arm that takes this spike protein and gloms it onto the virus. It doesn't work that way, right? You got to do this in giant vats. The vast majority, so vast of a majority of your material in these vats that you're using is waste that you have to actively do processes in order to hunt through the waste for what you thought you were attempting to create. So it's just bogus. I mean, it's not a production facility. So all these biolabs that were attempting to produce Slavic specific, there were 46 biolabs around the edges of the Ukraine, all focused at Russia. They were supposedly, or they were attempting to create Slavic specific, white people specific, Russia people specific DNA bioweapons to wipe out the hated Russians. That's because the Katharians hate the Russians probably more than any other group, for a lot of reasons, which we'll go into at some point in the future, or you can go and look now. Anyway, because it's out there in the history. So in all those years of the bioweapons, from 2008 until now, with all the releases that they did, they had squat in effect. But the Russians, they believed the Narodime. They believe it is possible to create DNA bioweapons. They've been trying to do it themselves all through the Cold War. And basically, they crapped out and then decided to be the Soviets decided to be humanitarian and shut down their biolabs. They had some really nasty bacteria and all this kind of stuff, but viruses and bacteria can't be altered to the point where they're ubiquitous to attack people. It's something else to get into. This is another misunderstanding because of the Narodime. The problem for the Khazarians is a lot of the people that are doing science for them were brought up under the Narodime and don't know any better. So the scientists actually think that this can be done. And here's the kicker. DNA does not describe how to build your body. The scientists are so confused. We're 20 years after the human genome had supposedly been decoded, and they cannot even decide what a gene is. Article in 2008 from 2018, and it's gotten worse since then. In the years since 2018, in this article that was put out, saying we don't know what a gene is, there's debates over whether this is a gene, how many genes we've got, and so the human genome in 2018 was thought to have, by one group, it was thought to have 17,000 coding genes and 19,000 non-coding genes. And they don't know what the fuck a non-coding gene is anyway, all right? So that would 17,000. So that's about 40,000, slightly less than 40,000 genes, okay? There's a real problem with that, right? A fruit fly has this many genes. The genome of a fruit fly is as large as our genome. Okay, if DNA describes how to build the body, this is something a little bit wonky. On top of that, there are fruit flies that have more DNA than us. Anyway, so, and here's the other kicker. We've identified 96,000 proteins in the human body. All right, 96,000 individual proteins in the human body, constantly being created and stuff going on, blah, 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 constantly. It was thought at one point there was one gene for every one of the proteins in the body, and that's how it worked. That's what Crick and Watson thought when they said, double helix, we've discovered it. This is how the human body is created. No, they were wrong. Crick and Watson were another group that was promoted in order to create a Narodime. Now, the problem for the Khazarian Mafia, as I point out, is their own scientists believe this pile of shit and think they can create bioweapons that will kill you based on your DNA. And it's simply not happening. Now, the good news is they're wasting vast quantities of money on this and achieving nothing, just like with CERN, something else that will take up under the Narodime. They're just not achieving anything. It's a big, basically a giant boondoggle. People are making a lot of money on it, and they're all supporting the Narodime, and they're going into the narrative side of it in terms of the fakeness of it, and they don't realize this because the Narodime is so pervasive. It's so polluted our science since the 800s AD, or CE, but for sure we've had big hits in our science in 1890, well, all the way back to 1830, and then 1890, and then the 1920s, and then into the 1950s when this bullshit came out. Now, at that time, the Narodime was going through a huge upheaval. It is no wonder we ended up with a false understanding of DNA, because at that time we had a major hit and a major pollution to the language. And that major pollution here in the United States was the removal of silver from the money. And so we see massive changes that occurred simultaneously to the withdrawing of silver from the economic language of the people, where we use silver or gold to have economic discussions with each other and energy exchanges. When you remove something like that, there are ripples throughout our reality. And so in the 1950s, they started taking silver out of the money supply. There was still some to be found in the circulating coins up into the 60s, even way up into the 70s, 80s, and 90s, but not in the way that the junk silver had existed. And so then they took silver out totally, and we weren't allowed to trade in silver at all, right? Just like the gold from the 1930s. Each of those things. So in 1930s, we get the the reduction of Tesla, the promotion of Einstein at the same time that gold is removed from circulation in the United States. And this alters the economic understanding of all of the people in the United States and that economic expression and that economic language as part of the paradigm, because they needed that to happen in order to maintain control with their paper currency. Otherwise, it would have all collapsed and we wouldn't have been here now. Then in the